Attorney Rahul Manchanda. He specializes in immigration law. Rahul, what is the legal framework for holding these people, these children, in these sorts of conditions?
Right. Well, the general framework involves the Flores case, the Flores matter, which was a very stringent judicial opinion, promulgated by a lot of input from various judges, Homeland Security officials, immigration officials, ICE officials of that nature, and that they determined that you couldn't hold, certain people, especially children, in custody for a certain period of time. So I think the 72-hour benchmark was here, but at most 20 days. And certainly within the framework, there are conditions, adequate housing, hygienic facilities, food, that kind of thing. And there's also issues pertaining to how many detainees could be within a cell, for example. So there's a whole host of conditions. It's a very detailed settlement, but that's one of the frameworks that they usually go by.
So we've now heard these distinctions being made because there's this image circulating around of President Obama's Homeland Security Chief, Jay Johnson, touring a similar facility with cages. And we've heard Donald Trump say, I didn't build these places. So is there truth to that? And if so, why the outrage now from Democrats?
Well, again, this is sadly, a very political issue. It seems to me that they're both using this issue at the expense of these migrants. The Democrats are trying to show that the Republicans are cruel and unusual, and the Republicans are showing that their Democrats are being obstructionists. But, the reality is that even El Salvador president had talked about, taking the blame. I think that one of the issues here is that we need to work with other countries as the United States. For 70 years, we've been intervening and involved with all these nations overseas. And I think that to walk away and build a wall is a mistake. I think, there are some elements out there that are taking, responsibility for some of the things that are happening. It can't just be the United States that deals with it. Unfortunately, it's a very, very tragic situation, and the blame game seems to be the order of the day. Democrats blaming Republicans, vice versa, Republicans blaming Democrats, globalists blaming nationalists, and nationalists blaming globalists. The reality is the truth lies somewhere in between. And I think that it's very important for the United States to work with other countries, but it's also important for other countries to take ownership of the problem. The fact that people are trying to flee these countries, willing to risk desert conditions, cartels, waterways, really speaks volumes about the innate country conditions of some of these nations. And to blame it on the United States or the border control, CBP or ICE, is, I think, a very, very big mistake. I think it's a conglomerated effort, and I think there needs to be a combined solution to look at everything generally from a national and international perspective. And I think that what the El Salvador president has done, Mr. Bukele has done, is extremely mature, but it's also reflective of a younger generation of government. You see a younger leader who isn't sort of constrained by the past 2 decades of the two-party central politics, which actually created a lot of these conditions that have caused these people to flee.
Rahul, I want to ask you, because we discussed President Bukele's actions on this channel, and we've been talking about international response, who's to blame for the crisis in Central America. But I want to ask these lawmakers, they saw, they're outraged from a legal standpoint, from a practical standpoint. What can they do now?
Well, it's a great question. I think that recently, the White House has just released $4.6 billion in additional funding, which I think will go towards bigger detention facilities, adequate housing, adequate medical care, making sure that people are not, placed like 70 people to a 50-person cell. These are short-term fixes. They're not by any means long-term fixes, and they're really just Band-Aids on the initial wound. But I think that for right now, that could be sufficient. But I think greater attention needs to be focused on the long term as well, with work with other nations. I think that, unfortunately, there's such a mass rush to the border. It's been augmented in recent years, probably bolstered also by the economy, the U.S. economy that's increasing. But these are short-term fixes. $4.6 billion is a Herculean amount of money. But even still, considering that that's a short-term fix, is very tragic indeed. I think that, for example, Mexico has recently agreed to post 6,000 troops, mostly on the Guatemala border, but interspersed throughout the country. Other nations are also working with the United States to increase, interception, but on a humane level. I mean, it has to be humane. There can't just be detention and jailings and killings. It has to be a very humane process. It's a very, very sad issue. There is that triangle that they talk about with Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico. But there needs to be more dialogue and discussion and working together with the counterparts of each nation so that it's a combined effort. But
Rahul,
this $4.6 billion that the White House just released, yep.
Rahul Manchanda from New York, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your insight.